Hello, my name is Marley and welcome back to this week's episode of Let's Talk with Lansino. Today I'm joined by Dr. Katie Bordlin, who is from Lansino, who's done some amazing research. And today we're going to be discussing the impact of birth-related trauma on breastfeeding. So Katie, tell me about your research. Why and what and when? Tell me all about it.
Sure. So I work for Lansino, and obviously we're well known for being a breastfeeding related company. A big part of my job is to do the kind of research that informs the new products that we develop, the ways that we can help mum. And predominantly that research is always focused on nipple pain, nipple care, the things that we think of that impact breastfeeding are generally around, physiological issues of the breast itself. What we decided to do a couple of years ago was to take a step back and to really start to think about what's impacting mums as a whole at that time when she's trying to breastfeed. So we did some foundational research which involved a survey of 1,000 UK-based mums. We asked them a series of questions about, first of all, what they planned for their birth, what they planned for breastfeeding, and what their intentions were around what they wanted the experiences of early motherhood to be. We then asked them some more questions about what actually happened. How did their birth go? How did breastfeeding go? And how did that differ from what they'd hoped? And it was really very interesting what we found. We published this research in the British Journal of Midwives in early 2020, and we think it's a really important message and point of conversation for mums and mums to be everywhere to understand that there's lots of challenges that everyone seems to be experiencing but maybe not talking about.
And what was the kind of general consensus then in terms of like the impact of birth trauma? What were most mums saying?
So I think with regards to breastfeeding, the population that we surveyed were women who had planned to breastfeed and had managed to breastfeed for some time. And they'd all completed their breastfeeding journey. So they'd all had a baby in the last 24 months and breastfed. And what we found is that they'd all breastfed for some amount of time, but overwhelmingly they'd had challenges. The challenges had led to them having a variety of issues, but overwhelmingly they'd had to stop breastfeeding earlier than they wanted to, or they'd had more challenges while they were breastfeeding. What we found is that predominantly the things you'd expect, nipple pain, nipple soreness, that kind of thing was the most common issue that was reported, and that tended to kind of resolve itself over the first few weeks or couple of months post-childbirth. But what we actually found is that issues relating to the birth themselves, so pain from sitting down, pain picking up their baby, all of those things also added to the stresses and trauma that mum was experiencing. And for 25% of the mums that we surveyed, they actually said that the pain they were in relating to the birth did actually contribute to the issues of breastfeeding. And these issues were leading them to stop breastfeeding earlier than they intended, and also to maybe introduce more combination feeding or needing more support when they were trying to establish and maintain breastfeeding.
This makes sense because in my work as a midwife, I've met lots and lots of mums who have said exactly that. It's too uncomfortable, I'm struggling. But as a direct result of the birth and trauma that they've suffered during the birth. So it's fantastic that you've done this research. Exactly.
It was definitely the theme that we found, is that although a lot of women had intended to have a fairly intervention-free birth, that isn't obviously the way that things often work out. You can plan as much as you want, but life will get in the way and circumstances will get in the way. So we saw that, probably reflective of what you'll see as a midwife, people having episiotomies, C-sections, emergency C-sections, all of which were deviation from their birth plan. And what we found is that when a mother's birth plan changed, her breastfeeding plan also was impacted. And I think a big part of that is the loss of control and the loss of ability to, if you've got a plan that you can follow, you feel much more like you're in control of your experience, and you can then, everything isn't as overwhelming. And I think one of the things we found, which was very interesting, is that when we asked mums what they had experienced and what was the outcome. As I said, most women carried on to breastfeed, and that is, what we see consistently. They'll breastfeed through issues for as long as they possibly can, until it gets too much and they have to look for other solutions. But we actually asked them, did you breastfeed with no impact? Or did you breastfeed and it impacted your mental health? Were you dreading every feed? Was it impacting you negatively? And it was actually more people chose that option. So it was, even the women who were, who breastfed for as long as they wanted to, they found it really traumatic, and actually it was the negatively impacting their mental health was a significant thing for them.
And this is why it's so important, and I spoke about this on a previous episode when we're talking about birth plans or birth preferences, as I like to call them, is to be candid and to make sure you feel yourself. Well, make sure the mums fill themselves with knowledge to understand about all different types of birth and to get that support in place afterwards, because you just don't know how things are going to be afterwards. You don't know, how the recovery, how the fourth trimester period is going to be. So having that support there is absolutely essential, especially when we're thinking about breastfeeding journeys. Really important.
Yeah, because I think they did find, based on the feedback we got from the survey, the majority of the women that we surveyed, they continued to breastfeed. It was much more difficult. It wasn't impossible, but the things that they needed to enable them to breastfeed, like someone to help them to lift their baby, someone to, some support in different positions to breastfeed, all of those things exist, hopefully, in your support network or in education, but it's about making sure they have access to that information. And I think that quite clearly this isn't something that is talked about enough. This is just one piece of research that we've done over the last couple of years, but we've done quite a lot more. And when you do speak to women about these issues, they are so they're desperate to talk to you. It's like it's always like that with breastfeeding in general. I think we have a very motivated mums are motivated to share their experiences and to help other mums, and that makes for really good, easy research. But it's specifically around the birth problems, impact post-birth, recovery time. We all totally underestimate how difficult it can be. And I think that there's an expectation to just kind of get on with it afterwards and focus on baby and not yourself. And that shows through the research that we've done at Lansano, and that's kind of foundational to us thinking about how we can support mums to breastfeed.
So as part of your research, Dr. Katie, I saw that 47% of mums said they needed assistance after they had their babies with feeding. That's quite a significant number, isn't it? That's almost 50%. Almost half of women were saying that they needed help to breastfeed.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because lots of women that I speak to, especially ones that are having their first baby, kind of expect a baby just to, feed, not need any help, and actually your research is kind of showing otherwise, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it can be especially combined with the sleep deprivation and how exhausted mums are straight after the birth anyway. Yeah. There's no time to catch up, and I think that's exacerbated if you have a traumatic birth, which maybe has some physical delay in you being recovered and being able to be comfortable. Predominantly the biggest driving factor for this in the women that we surveyed was C-section. So, if you have a C-section, it's extremely debilitating. I think that in particular isn't really discussed enough. It's major abdominal surgery. Yeah. It takes a lot of recovery time, and the muscles that they cut mean that, lifting, something as heavy as an infant, even if they're only a few pounds, is really difficult. Yeah. And that, I think, is one of the biggest drivers towards the data point that we saw where, getting comfortable picking the baby up, being able to feed comfortably was an issue. But we did see that anyone who had stitches, episiotomy, and just general birth-related discomfort from a vaginal birth, also discomfort sitting was a critical issue when they were trying to get comfortable and breastfeed. And when you've got a new baby and they're cluster feeding, that is not a quick job. No. It can be, and actually the knock-on effect of that is quite significant because if you've got a uncomfortable perineum and you can't sit comfortably, so you're holding the baby awkwardly, then you're latched, you're positioning, and actually everything else will be out of kilter, and actually you may then end up with those nipple pain or nipple soreness or cracked nipples that appears unrelated, but actually it all ties into it's that everything that's impacting mum at that time. And I think that was the critical kind of point of the research, was that if we want to really understand the things that are impacting mum in being able to breastfeed as long as she intends to, and especially get through those really tough first few weeks, if you're only thinking about the nipple, you're really not thinking about everything that's going on with her. And when you think about the things that can change for mum, so you can't make your sore perineum better or get rid of your C-section incision, but when you've got lots of well-meaning family and friends who are offering support, one way that they can offer support can sometimes be the one thing you don't want to happen, which is, breastfeeding less or offering the baby to somebody else to help to manage the feeds, which undermines that initiation of breastfeeding. It's the one thing you can change, but it's the one thing you don't want to change. So by supporting the other bits that through, whether it's product solutions, whether it's educational solutions, whether it's mums just knowing that they've got that other people have experienced this or are going through this and have gone through this, it can just help you to not feel like you can't cope or can't manage. And the fact that many of the women who responded to the survey did continue to breastfeed, but they said it negatively impacted their mental health when they were doing it, I thought that was really significant, because we only got that data point because we asked. It was these closed survey type research projects. If you don't ask, you often won't find out. And when I looked at the published literature in this area previously, there's some really excellent, robust studies that have been published. And when I looked through all the different options that they'd given to mums about stopping breastfeeding, there was no tick box for that. It was just I kept breastfeeding. It wasn't I kept breastfeeding, but how did that make you feel? And I think that is the key to this. If you don't ask the right questions, you may not actually find out what mum's really experiencing. And I don't know, as a midwife, I suppose that's one of the things that you guys must do, is to make sure that you're asking those kind of questions to get the answers, because it's all focused on baby, and maybe they won't offer that information.
So what do you think about supporting mums in terms of, we've spoken a little bit about friends and family, but what do you think that friends and family can do to help support new mums in the fourth trimester and with breastfeeding? Is there anything you think that they could potentially do?
I think it's just really important to have a conversation, open conversations, and to ask for help and support if you need it. But I do think the more that we bring these kind of topics out into the open, the more people realise that they're not the first person to be experiencing these things, and that will always help. There's practical things around alternate breastfeeding positions, for example, which can be really, really helpful when you have had a C-section, or you just need to hold the baby in a slightly different way to relieve pain, whether it's breast nipple pain or pain from the perineal area. But that's not always, even that isn't always well known. I think mums are increasingly good at looking for support online and, through message boards, and the internet is a really great tool. But I think that, one-on-one, when they maybe really need the help, it's not always feeling like it's right there. So the more they can talk to their health visitor, their midwife, and talk about the concerns that they have, they will have solutions, but unless it's that fixation of the baby being the most important thing, it doesn't matter how often that we tell or want to tell new mums that they need to ask for help. All they're focused on is the fact that their baby is okay, and they may not actually even think to ask. So I think it's about us always asking the direct question. How are you healing though? How are you feeling? You did have a C-section. Is it sore? If we don't ask as friends, as family members, or as healthcare providers, then we possibly won't find out until a little bit later, when we could have helped a bit sooner, I think.
Exactly. And I think also there's nothing stopping, partners, close family, friends from seeking outside help as well, if they feel that they need to. If there's any concerns over the mum's physical or mental well-being, they can go and look online. They can have a look at organisations that might be able to help support. They can speak to health visitors, and they can enlist the support of outside services if they feel that they need to as well. So, there are lots and lots of things that friends and family, can do to kind of step in and help. And I think in education, I'm always a great believer in everyone getting educated, not just the person who's giving birth, but also the partner or the kind of close family get educated on things like birth and feeding, because that then helps. That helps them to become an advocate and helps them support the mum or the person who's giving birth.
Absolutely. And I think, when you have your birthing partner come into the delivery room when you're giving birth, you've kind of gone through that plan with them. This is what I want, this is what I'd like to happen. And I think if we do more of that for mum's recovery, then they can also be the advocate, for the first few weeks when mum may need it most, but is focused on the baby.
Yeah. And when you think about it, when you think about a new mum, and a lot of emphasis is put on breastfeeding and getting breastfeeding right and making sure that mum is comfortable. But when you think about everything else she's got going on, you've got family and friends often focusing on the baby, but actually she may well be suffering from headaches. She may well have after pains, which I've already spoken about on another episode. She may well be having breast engorgement. She may well have nipple pain if there is issues with the feeding. She may well have a cesarean section scar. She may well have perineal trauma. So there's all these things going on, and we don't always appreciate that there's all these things going on. And on top of sleep deprivation and goodness knows what else. So it's really important that we take all those factors into consideration. You know. So which is why the work that you've done is essential, really. It's great.